Hi, it's Paul Guppy with the Washington Policy Center, and this is our regular weekly update of what is going on in Washington State, what policies are being put in place that are going to affect the lives of everyone in our state. As always with our viewers, I'd like to remind you to please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And we always love looking at comments as well. That's one of the more entertaining things that I do, and I'm a huge free speech advocate. So positive, negative, neutral comments, helpful tips, those are all welcome, and I really enjoy reading through those and hearing what our viewers have to say. With that, our update, I'm going to cover 4 quick issues today. A little bit of wrap up on the budget because the legislative session has ended. An important 100-year anniversary that just is coming up here on June 1st. An important bill that was passed in Illinois, of all places, that would be a model for us. And then finally, some myth busting about changes in messaging on the left and having a new appreciation for the direction that policy and even our culture is going based on events happening in our wonderful city of Seattle. So let's get started. First, our indomitable Vice President Todd Myers did a first-class summary of the legislative session. He did this on a video, but also I highly recommend his blog that was just posted last Thursday, in which Todd goes through the major themes that happened in the legislature. The top one is what happened with the budget, pointing out that in January, our newly inaugurated Governor, Bob Ferguson, had a very hopeful tone, very bipartisan, working with the other side, a completely different, more open and welcoming leadership style than we had under the 12 years of Jay Inslee. However, that promise did not really come to fulfillment. So at the end of the day, Ferguson still signed the largest tax increase in our history, a massive increase in overspending by the government. As Todd points out, he signed 48 bills that contain emergency clauses. This is an abuse that we've been trying to get rid of for some time. He did veto one emergency clause. Great, that's positive. But the trend of using emergency clauses, which you tack to routine bills, there's no emergency. They just put this magic formula wording in there. And what that does is prevent initiatives and citizen petitions and voting on to repeal bills later on in the year much harder. So it's a political move to try to protect unpopular bills that the Democrats have passed in the legislature. Another claim that Todd went after, quite rightly, this is all shown by the numbers, is that these taxes are not on the wealthy only. The taxes increases, and there's a whole wide raft of them, are based on regressive taxation that hits working families the hardest. In fact, as an analyst who's looked at these patterns for years, I would go so far as to say that working families were targeted. Virtually every source of revenue that hits working families were increased by the Democrats. Property taxes, vehicle fees, B&O taxes on small businesses, the gas tax, which is essential to our economy and everybody has to pay that. Those were all increased. So even just by the numbers, working families were hit hardest by regressive taxation. And again, I'm just pointing out what Todd did. He ran the numbers that state spending has doubled since 2013. And if you even factor in population and inflation, state spending still increased by 51%. And that's even assuming that in 2013, somehow government was at the ideal level of spending that it was, which even then it was inflated, and we've been building on top of that. There were a few good actions. Inslee vetoed some minor spending things, but only added up to about $25 million out of a $78 billion budget. So that's just peanuts. That has no effect. It doesn't even send a signal to the public that the Olympia is trying to get spending under control. They completely gave up on that, and we will be paying the price indefinitely into the future in terms of higher financial burden, higher taxes, harder to support state government in our state. With that, another theme that, again, Todd pointed out is we are trying to promote local solutions. So everything is being centralized in Olympia. These are top-down mandates that are sent out instead of trusting people at the local level to engage in responsible self-government. That's how democracy is supposed to work, and make decisions for themselves. That is gradually being shifted away to Olympia, and local communities all across the state are losing their ability to govern themselves, solve their own problems regarding housing, zoning, taxation, issues like that, which in turn undermines self-government. So we have one political party that claims that they're protecting democracy, and yet the policies they enact go in the opposite direction. With that, I'll point out the next issue, which is Vicki Murray on our staff, who's our indomitable education person. She points out that June 1st is the 100th anniversary of a key Supreme Court case that was decided back in 1925, or 1925. This had to do with the Oregon Compulsory Education Act, in which Oregon was trying to require that every child in the state had to attend a public school. This case, called Peirce v. Society of Sisters, went all the way to the Supreme Court, as I said, and the Supreme Court struck that down in a unanimous decision. And what's great is some of the language that came out of this decision, which should inform our education policy today. So the court said, the Oregon law improperly interferes with the liberty of parents to direct the upbringing and education of their children. Very common sense. The court also said, a child is not a mere creation of the state. Children are not units that are directed and moved around based on what government officials want. Children are human persons who are loved and cared for by their parents and should have their education and upbringing directed by their parents. This is something that the highest levels of our government instituted a century ago, and that has gradually been eroded. That's why it's important to note this particular case. The passage of the repeal of the parental rights law in this session indicates that we're moving in the wrong direction. There's also cynicism because the parental rights initiative was enacted by legislators last year with great hoopla and celebration. 132 lawmakers of both parties voted for it. Only 15 lawmakers voted against it. And yet, barely one calendar year later, the majority of the lawmakers, the Democrats are in control, are rolling that back. So that's moving in exactly the opposite direction of where the Supreme Court said parents should direct the upbringing and education of their kids. It's also in contrast to the trend in the rest of the country. So according to Vicki's data, she shows that 35 states now have expanded school choice programs. Over a dozen states have universal school choice that's eligible to every family in the state. And that is creating a gradual revolution in the quality of education. Washington State has not been part of this. So we are being left out, falling behind. We have a regressive monopoly education system, and the powerful union just insists on locking out any kind of school choice if they can possibly get away with it. We do have some forms of choice, particularly through charter schools. So what we predict is going to happen is that test scores are going to show that other states are doing better and that Washington State is gradually falling behind. Just this afternoon, Vicki was looking at her computer and she got all excited saying new NAEP scores are out, national test scores, and she's working on comparing all the different states. We won't be surprised to see that once again, Washington State is probably slipping in the rankings. The next issue is a bill that Mark Harmsworth, our business analyst, noticed passed in Illinois, even a strong blue state. But this bill, which is SB 1563, protects property rights in Illinois by allowing property owners to evict squatters and identify them legally as trespassers, and therefore take action to remove people from homes and properties where they don't have a legal right to be. Again, Washington has moved in the opposite direction. Once upon a time, we had very strong property protection laws, which is just a matter of justice. If you own a home or property, you have a right to control access to that property, to give people permission to be there, or to tell other people that they don't have permission to be there. And that should be supported by the government and the courts. In Seattle and other communities across Washington State, eviction has become impossibly difficult, usually taking over a year. What that means, and this is all in the name of providing free housing for people, but what it actually does is make homelessness and affordable housing worse, because then property owners won't put their units on the market. And I know of particular cases where families inherit homes, homes that are temporarily available to be rented. There's some future plan, but for a year or two, the family may want to put it out to be rented. Mother-in-law apartments, basement units that people have. And common sense would say, let's rent this for 6 months or a year, make a little income, and provide affordable housing units out there. Many property owners are willing to take a discount in order to get some income, cheaper rent, as opposed to zero. But the incentive in Washington state is you don't dare allow anyone to move onto your property because you'll never get rid of them. So that's where this kind of organic creation of more housing supply is dried up in Washington state, because it's safer to lock up a house, padlocks, and keep it empty until you decide to put it on the market or whatever the future plan for it is, than to allow it to be rented to low-income families or students or people who want access to affordable housing. That is the effect of our eviction laws in our state. Mark Harmsworth points out, why don't we take an example from Illinois, again, blue, Democrat-dominated state, and pass the same kind of legislation here. The last issue I'll touch on is a bit of myth busting, where Seattle, my hometown, we're proudly located here, headquartered here as a statewide organization, is always presents itself as being tolerant and inclusive and welcoming, and yet it's hit the national news that a Christian group was holding a rally. They were attacked and assaulted by demonstrators. The police did a great job of maintaining control. But the important part for us is protecting free speech, and particularly getting at this idea that left-wing people in Seattle present them as being themselves as being inclusive and welcoming until somebody shows up with a message that they don't like. So that's not actually respecting free speech. Another reason we monitor it is because Seattle is the test kitchen for left-wing ideas in this state. And if a trend takes hold here, we would expect to see that same trend or policy being implemented in other places. And then the last point I'll make about that is that free market conservatives, those of us who love economic freedom, respecting personal rights, are often told, like, don't get involved in social issues. That's controversial. That's hot button. And yet that's a false distinction, because cultural shifts that are going on create the atmosphere and the groundwork. It moves the Overton window, as they say in policy, in the direction of free market ideas. So cultural issues and economic issues often overlap. You can gain popular public support for smart economic ideas, free market ideas, when the culture moves more in the direction of respecting free speech. That's why these events in Seattle we think are important. We're going to continue to follow them, and hopefully we will allow true tolerance and inclusiveness throughout our state, which allows everybody access to public spaces so that we can debate ideas openly. And with that, I'll wrap up and say thanks for watching, and I'll be back in the future with another update. Thank you.
If you found this informative, share it with a friend, and consider checking out one of our suggested videos over here. Make sure you're subscribed so that you can stay up to date with the latest policy news from Washington.